My whole thing is whenever I'm weak at something, or whenever I'm scared of something, I master it. I was a weak-minded person, so I mastered my mind. And in mastering my mind, I mastered the human mind. And I realized why I no longer judge people, why I no longer put people on a pedestal, because we're all fucked up in our own way. We all have demons. Some people hide them better than other people. So I know we all have them. By me knowing that, I know that most alpha males are very fragile. Very fragile. They never want to see another person harder than them, especially in that kind of realm.
The ego attachment to that is very strong.
Ego will fuck you up every time. Ego is serious. So if I can hurt your ego, I got you. So by me having such a fragile ego growing up, all this was my advantage. I was doing a live autopsy on how fucked up I was. I was like, hey, this fucks me up. I bet it fucks other people up too. So I started using all these different tools and tactics to get in instructors' heads. And the taking souls, that's where it happened, man. We're Wednesday, freezing fucking cold. Everybody's jackhammering. Everybody wants to, everybody's just wanting to get through it now.
Jackhammering is when you just can't stop shivering.
You can't stop shivering. You're sitting there just uncontrollably jackhammering. And the instructors take great pride in watching you suffer. They do. We, in a sick way, it's kind of funny. You were there once as a student. Now you're an instructor. But I knew, how would I be thinking if I was an instructor? I would love seeing this sadistic shit go on. But what wouldn't I like to see? I would hate to see some guys just looking like this is just another fucking day on the fucking beach and go fuck yourself. I would hate to see that.
Yeah.
So
because they all want to think like when they did it, they were harder.
They were harder.
Yeah.
Everybody's hard. So I said, you know what, man? It's time. I can't fight you. You guys can fuck me up all day long. That's your job. And I love your job. I love what you guys are doing. You guys are making us better. But now I'm going to take the tactical advantage and I'm going to start fucking with you. So I got my boat crew, Bill Brown. I had Chris Kyle on my boat crew, right. American Sniper. I had a couple of hardcore motherfuckers. And everybody right now is kind of like in their own world. Let's just get through this, man. I can't wait till Friday so we can graduate, how we can get going. I said, let's go ahead and have some fun. I said, we're gonna start fucking with these guys. So the evolution here was we just got through with med check. We're stripped down to nothing, and they're checking us out, making sure we're good. Checking for pneumonia, checking for fucked up knees. My knees are all jacked up, but they're giving me shots and shit. And I was like the boat crew leader of boat crew 2. Mm-hmm. So I'm in the front of the boat, and I tell our guys, this is what we're gonna do. The boat's like on our heads. That's all it was. We're supposed to lift the boats up above our head. That's all you gotta do. But when you're this weak, you're this fragile, you're this tired, the boat's heavy. So there's a thing you can do when you do boat presses. You can get the boat and like just toss it up and catch it. And that shows like you're jacked up. So everybody's holding the boat and they're shaking and the boat's starting to come down their head and all the boat crews are all lined up and they're fucked up. And I'm looking at that and I turn around my boat crew and I say, hey guys, it's time to fucking take some souls. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I said, we're gonna get, I go, you see all these fucking instructors out here, all in their fucking jackets and drinking coffee and laughing and smiling and shit. I want their fucking faces to go straight up fucking numb. So we're going to do this. We're going to start boat pressing this motherfucker. Just take my lead. Trust me. You'll get energy from it. We start throwing this boat up in the fucking air, catching it, throwing it up and catching it. And we start yelling, can't hurt fucking boat crew 2. We're yelling our fucking ass off. And we're doing it. And they make us stop. Like what the fuck? Like, stop. I look at these instructors. And their faces literally look like someone just took their soul out. Cause I know where their minds were. Like they were thinking about themselves. Like, what the fuck just happened, man? I know me on Wednesday, I couldn't have done that. How are they doing it? So the rest of the time, going through Hell Week, it was like we owned it. We owned it.
Right.
Boat Crew 2, we won every single race. We were just dominating. And it was a strong boat crew, and that's where Taking Souls is, there's a few Taking Souls stories, but that's one of them.
So I like this idea of, taking this inventory tool and applying it to how you're spending your time throughout the day. I talk about this a lot, and you went into detail in this challenge about, look, man, if you actually write down how you're spending your time throughout the day over a 7-day period, you're going to, it's crazy because I thought I was being pretty efficient with my time, and I've done this, and it's just amazing how much time is wasted that you're not even consciously aware. It's
unreal how much time you waste during the day, and most of it is on these fucking computers, phones, Instagramming back and forth, whatever the fuck you call this shit nowadays, tweeting and texting and shit. We waste so much time on our little gadgets It's unreal. And we talk about we have no time. If you really you have to take your day and write down this one day. Everything you do, write that down. And you're like, my God, I am wasting so much time on frivolous bullshit. It's not even funny. I mean, it will, if it doesn't infuriate you, it should. Because there's so much time. I can't get it in. Look at your schedule. You just wasted 7 hours today on bullshit. I mean, and you don't have an hour a day to try to get something in for yourself. I guarantee everybody can find an hour.
Then it becomes about willingness.
Yeah.
Because most people just they're not willing to get up that early or to make those sacrifices required. So it's a function of how badly do you want to change your life, and what are you willing to endure to craft that life that you aspire to have, or do you just want to talk about it? Yeah, I mean it's fucking miserable. It is miserable. I mean, to get up every day or 5 days a week, whatever. When it's snowing, shiny, not shiny, not comfortable, and to go in the gym and work out when you don't want to go to the gym, it is not fun. Well, and we're in a culture that is driving everybody towards this idea that happiness is purchased through luxury, comfort, and ease. 100%. The truth could not be, more different from that reality. That if you want to find peace with yourself, self-understanding, self-knowledge, self-esteem, all of these things are going to be found only through sacrifice, getting uncomfortable, reevaluating what your normal is, and putting yourself in situations that you don't want to fucking do. Yes, and we want it very fast. If you don't see results in the first 2 days or the first week, I'm done. That's the mentality of most people. The struggle is too real. We're not patient. We like in a world where you can Google the best restaurants around me right now, no one is patient. And for you to lose weight, for you to stop drinking, whatever the hell you're going through, it takes a lot of patience, a lot of time, and a lot of pitfalls, a lot of plateaus. You're going to hit so many fucking plateaus. If you don't know how to get around that plateau, it's not going to happen fast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody wants the hack. Yeah, everybody wants the hack. There is no hack, man. There's no hack. What do you think is the biggest stumbling block that most people face with this kind of journey? Honestly, is they have the woe is me mentality. It's too hard. Life isn't fair. These things in life are not easy for me. You look to your left and you look to your right and you start to judge yourself off other people. Like if you're a female, well, she's skinny and she doesn't work out as hard as I do. And everything starts to corrupt your mind. You start to look around too much at other people and what they're doing, and that starts to corrupt your own dialogue. We are judging ourselves against too many fucking people. You have to judge yourself against yourself. And that's the one thing I started learning, man. This isn't a race against me and Rich Roll. This is a race against David Goggins and David Goggins alone. And once you can silence all that bullshit, all the outside interference and things that are attracting your mind to everything, you can then start to grow in realizing I'm stressed out for no reason. This is my own little race. This is my own timeline, and this is how I'm going to run it. You got to go to war with yourself before there's peace. That's what I say in the book. That's what you say in the book. You must go to war with yourself before you find peace. So I'm trying to give you tools on how to do that. And I'm not considering smile and be happy about it. It's a hard journey. It's a real journey. It's a journey that's going to take you way outside of being comfortable. If you want to be great, you want to be the baddest motherfucker ever at what you do, you're going to be misunderstood by everybody because you're going to be so fucking obsessed and so driven to get there. That's what it takes. That's the truth. It takes every second of your fucking life. Anybody says balance? Yeah, balance is important for a lot of fucking people. It is. But if you want to fucking go to that edge where people do not like you, don't understand you, question everything you fucking do, you've arrived. When you are misunderstood to the point where fucking people think you're psycho and you're nuts and you're this and that, why are you in the fucking gym at 1 o'clock in the fucking morning? You just got through doing an op for fucking 13, 14 hours after Ranger School, man, at the gym. What is wrong? You will never understand what is wrong with me. And that's why I'm so fucking glad you don't, because I'm in the right fucking spot. When people don't understand you anymore, you're in that spot of obsession and drive where people are like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? I don't want to talk to you, man, because you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. Boom. Don't want you to get it. Yeah. Don't want you to get it. Yeah, it's powerful, man. Roger that, man.
It's all about mindset.
Yeah.
That's it, man. You have to change the dialogue within your head. And one thing I guarantee you, there's some stat out there about January 1. All that kindling that you started, all that motivation, usually burn out by about 10 to 12 days later. So let's see how far you can take that shit. Let's see if you can get a fucking
That is a
inferno
challenge
going.
from Goggins to you.
Usually it's 10 to 12 days, man. People always come to me, man, hey, I want a workout program. I no longer give them anymore because you're going to waste my fucking time. Because I know most people out there, once that fucking one alarm clock goes off, the wrong time of the day, I'm not going to the gym.
Right. Or they get the workout program, but then they're like, hey, they hit you up again. What kind of watch do I need to get?
That's right.
What kind of shoes? The questions just keep coming. Every day goes by without anything going on.
Keep coming. Go to the store, buy a pair of shoes, and Merry Christmas. Have fun with that shit. Call me after you lose some fucking weight running your ass in the dirt, and then we'll work on some other shit.
Well, I met my now ex-husband, and I'd never heard of Lutherans, except for, I guess, maybe Garrison Keillor. Like, I had never, I didn't know what a Lutheran was. And he was, like, really involved in, like, Christian social justice, and I was like, what the fuck is that? Like, what? That's a thing? Like, it just seemed, I'd never heard those two things go together. And so he sort of introduced me to more progressive form of Christianity, and I was just fascinated that even existed. And, we moved out to California, and I very begrudgingly started going to this Lutheran church that had this gay pastor, and going to this adult confirmation class at night, and I just soaked it up. I had no idea that you could believe those things. I none. So it was like the thing I still loved, which was Jesus, plus stuff that seemed just real and genuine and like easy to believe because I already knew it was true. Like when they said we're simultaneously sinner and saint, I'm like, fuck, man, that explains a lot. That's super helpful. Thanks, guys.
And then what compels you to go to divinity school and become a pastor?
There were two things. The first time I had that hit of, I think I have like, quote, a calling, was when my friend PJ committed suicide, and he was a comic and also in recovery. And I had not been to divinity school or seminary at this point. But when PJ died, our friends just turned to me and were like, well, you could do the funeral, right? And just literally because I was the only religious person in my friend group, the only thing that qualified me. And I said, oh, okay. And it was like this, it was at the Comedy Works in downtown Denver, and it was packed, and I was giving his eulogy, and I just looked out, and there were all these like academics and comics and queers and recovering alcoholics. And I just thought, oh man, these people do not have a pastor. And then I went, oh shit.
It's going to have to be you.
Oh, damn. So that was my first hit about that. Like trying,
and there was a sense of being called.
Yeah, I felt called to be a pastor to my people, not to fit in some box that the institutional church has for if that's a job you want. You know what I mean? Those are two different things.
Right, like you could minister to these people in a way that no one else that you knew could.
I think that we need load-bearing structures. And that's what religion. This is the first time we've had cultures that weren't religious, like in human history. So there was a way in which religion was a load-bearing structure in terms of understanding who we were, understanding morality, having a symbol system for imaging the divine, for marking the year together. There's a function that religion has played in throughout human history that I feel like, even though the institutions of religion have hurt a lot of people, I just think it's just not time to dispense with that idea entirely. And it's a really recent idea in human history that you can just choose your own symbol system. That's new.
Yeah. Well, the foundations of religion are crumbled, and there's a crisis of trust in those structures and those institutions.
Which I think is why people are like, well, I feel like I like to listen to Nadia. Well, I think it's just because I really do try to be very forthcoming with my shortcomings and with things I've gotten wrong or shit I don't know. There's not the curtain so much.
Yeah.
There's nothing you're going to like find out that's gonna
Right.
Like at one point I was
but that's also like something that you learn in AA, right?
Totally.
To like own those flaws
Yeah.
and find the empowerment in the vulnerability.
And to not actually have shame about it. I mean, that's the thing is like, I believe in the power of grace so strongly that I have no shame in admitting why I need it.
Mm-hmm.
So then people feel like they can trust what I'm saying. Also, like self-incrimination is like my go-to rhetorical move. And that allows me to be more hearable to people because I'm not standing above them.
You can connect with you. And listen, I've heard you speak. It's very, it's not just, it's an incredible experience to hear you speak. And I can feel myself connected to the message that you're putting out there. And it makes me reflect back on my experience as a young person going to church and just sitting in these pews thinking, what am I doing here? I can't relate to any of this. I don't understand what they're talking about. I'm falling asleep. Why is that guy swinging that rope with the terrible smelling stuff? And he's dressed up. No, I went to an Episcopalian, elementary school. I just found the whole thing totally bizarre. And I was like confused about what I was supposed to get out of it. It wasn't that it wasn't that I was traumatized by it. I just didn't understand it, and I didn't understand why everyone felt compelled to go. Like I was getting nothing out of it.
Have you reverted to any of it in times of crisis at all?
Not in an organizational, structured
no,
kind
but I mean
of way.
Personally.
Yeah, in a non-denominational kind of spiritual way. Yeah, I found God in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and my spiritual growth has taken me through an exploration of many different types of faith and experiences and practices and teachers and the like. And I haven't settled into one particular perspective on that, but I've learned from all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing that Esther said, and I'm just quoting like smarter women than myself, but she said that it's easy. That one of the things that religion offers is that in times of crisis and of pain, when we're collapsing, there's something to hold us. Like it's easy to come up with rituals and practices and stuff in times of birth or weddings. But when shit hits the fan, there's something there to hold you, that there are these sort of rituals or prayers that have been worn smooth by generations of the faithful in a way that can kind of bring us comfort when you can't just create your own thing on the spot when you're in a position of crisis and pain. I thought that was beautiful.
But can you have that connection without the baggage that comes with the institution?
That's the question.
Yeah, right.
No, that's literally the question right now. I mean, when I left Christianity for a decade, I couldn't have anything to do with it. I was, after I left the church I was raised in. So when people say like, look, a lot of us have to leave for reasons of self-preservation. Like, I get that. Yeah. I never judge it. But I think that there is a path to integrating our religious upbringings rather than rejecting. That eventually there's that kind of work that can be done too. Right. Even if it's just, there's this prayer my grandmother said when I was going to sleep every night that's still really meaningful, and I'm going to integrate that into my life. Yeah. That's a part of wellness to me, to be able to do that. So I've been just sort of inviting people into considering what that might look like, and it doesn't have to be a betrayal of the part of you that needed to reject it for good reason, to say, yeah, but it still formed who I am on some level, and I want to make friends with that part of me.
Say something to the person who's listening who doesn't have a connection with faith, or perhaps like lost their connection with faith in whatever tradition they find themselves in. Like, what is it about faith and connection that you find to be so important as part of the human condition, and how can that person find their way back to a place of incorporating that into their life?
Well, in a way, it's not like a super popular sentiment, but I I don't feel like I'm enough in a sense that I do think having a power that's more than just me and accessing that is has transformed my life, and that's possible and available for anyone, regardless of what they believe or what sort of, faith they have, that there are things that accessing, like having a connection to our source and to the divine, allows us to undergo a certain type of healing and transformation that would be very difficult for us to do just as on our own as individuals. Mm-hmm. So that's the power of it to me. And there are things like people who were raised religious and had to leave. Sometimes there are still like hymns that are dear to them, or prayers their grandmother said, or whatever. And I think just finding those things and integrating them back into our lives on our own terms can be really healing. And it's like this spiritual reclamation project. And it's okay to do that. It's who you are, and it's fine, because your symbol system forms you in a way that's hard to escape. So making friends with it on your own terms as an adult can be, it can be healing.
It's important for us to think about this. So there's extremely strong scientific evidence that there are three kinds of cause of depression and anxiety, and to some degree they play out in fact all forms of mental and emotional problems. So there's biological causes, like your genes, like real brain changes that happen when you become depressed, that can make it somewhat harder to get out. Those are real, right? There are people who deny them. They are definitely wrong. The evidence is very clear on that. There are psychological causes, which are how you think about yourself, and then there are social causes, which are how we live together. And these are all real, but what we've done is we've largely, as a culture, told a story that focuses exclusively on the biology, right? Think about what my doctor told me. There's just a problem in your brain. The problem with that, well, the first problem with that is it's not true, right? But the second problem with that is what it tells people is your distress doesn't mean anything. It's like a glitch in a computer program. And someone who really helped me to think a bit differently about this, I went to interview this South African psychiatrist called Derek Summerfield, who's a wonderful man. And he happened to be in Cambodia in 2001 when they introduced chemical antidepressants for the first time for the people in that country. And the local doctors, the Cambodian doctors, had never heard of these drugs. So they were like, what are they? And he explained. And they said, we don't need them. We've already got antidepressants. And he said, what do you mean? He thought they were going to talk about some kind of herbal remedy, like St. John's wort or something. Instead, they told him a story. There was a farmer in their community who one day stood on a landmine and got his leg blown off. He worked in the rice fields. So they gave him an artificial limb, and he went back to work in the rice fields after, I forget what it was, some months. But apparently it's very painful to work underwater with an artificial leg. I'm guessing it was traumatic for obvious reasons. The guy started to cry all day, didn't want to get out of bed, developed classic depression. They said to Dr. Summerfield, well, that's when we gave him an antidepressant. And he said, what? They explained that they went and sat with him. They listened to him. They realised that his pain made sense. They figured if they bought him a cow, he could become a dairy farmer. He wouldn't be in this position that was screwing him up so much. So they bought him a cow. Within a couple of weeks, his crying stopped. Within a month, his depression was gone. They said to Dr. Summerfield, so that cow, that was an antidepressant. That's what you mean, right? Now, if you've been raised to think about this the way we have, that sounds like a joke. I went to my doctor for an antidepressant. He gave me a cow. But what those Cambodian doctors knew intuitively is what the leading medical body in the world Health Organization, has been trying to tell us for years. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, you're not crazy. You're not a machine with broken parts. You're a human being with unmet needs. And what you need is practical love and support from the people around you to get those deeper needs met. It's a very different way of talking about these problems that explains to people their pain is a signal. It means something. It evolved for a reason. It's telling you your needs aren't being met. Or some other things, obviously reference to your biology.
Right, or there's some, psychological event that occurred that you haven't really fully processed or worked through. There's some hitch in your operating system that requires redress in one form.
So I wouldn't say
another.
I wouldn't call it a hitch in an operating system. I would say
if you're experiencing grief in the loss of a loved one or something like yes, there are natural reactions that we've kind of been told we should just get over that kind of stuff rather than really just embrace them for what they are, because that is that is what it is to be human, and that's certainly fine. And to stigmatize that or to kind of pathologize that is certainly wrong. But they're messages, they're wake up calls that
they're signals.
Yeah,
exactly.
Basically, you need to do that. And I think to go back to the cultural piece, if someone's grieving the loss of a loved one and they're uncomfortable sitting with that grief, we have a system that's set up to help you and say, you don't need to feel this way. Like take this pill, right? Because we've gotten to a place where it's almost understood that we never need to feel bored or uncomfortable or ill at ease, right? That we can just medicate all of that, and implicit in that is this idea that we should all be happy all the time.
I think people are right to want to be happy and satisfied in their lives. The question is a deeper thing I think you're getting at, which is, so let's think about grief, for example. There was this thing that happened in the 1970s that I think is really revealing. So in the 1970s, the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, who are obviously the main body of psychiatrists in the US and psychologists, decided to do a kind of basic, kind of obvious thing. They decided they were going to standardize how depression was diagnosed across the US. So up to then, doctors were just basically deciding for themselves what depression meant. Uh-huh. So the APA drew up a simple checklist of 10 symptoms. Kind of obvious things, crying a lot, you could guess them. And they got this 10 list of 10 symptoms, and they send it to doctors all over the United States, and they say, if your patient shows more than 5 of these 10 symptoms for more than 2 weeks, diagnose them as mentally ill and do what you can. So they send this out. But within quite a short period afterwards, psychiatrists start to come back and go, we've got a bit of a problem here. If we use this checklist in the way you're telling us to, we're going to have to diagnose every grieving person in the United States as depressed, because these are also the symptoms of grief. And the APA got together and they said, well, that's not what we meant. Clearly we didn't intend that. So they invented something that became known as the Grief Loophole, where they said, okay, if your patients come to you and they've got more than 5 of these 10 symptoms for more than 2 weeks, diagnose them as mentally ill, unless someone they love has died in the last year, in which case it doesn't count.
That's the only exception.
They're not crazy. Well, exactly. So they started doing this. But this began to beg the question, hang on a minute, why is someone you love dying? What we're saying is, what we're meant to tell doctors meant to tell people is, so if you feel this way, it's just a problem in your brain that just needs to be drugged into submission, except there is one circumstance in life where it's an understandable response. Well, why is that the only circumstance? Why, if my mother dies, I'm allowed to feel like that, but not if I lose my job? Why not if I become homeless? Why not if I'm stuck in a job I hate for the next 40 years, right? But what that does is a wonderful woman called Dr. Joanne Cassiatore, who's the leading expert on traumatic grief in the United States, has really done amazing work on this, asking, well, once you acknowledge that depression can be largely a response to life, that just challenges the whole system we've built. The system we've built is not designed to talk about context. It's not designed to talk about how do we sit with you and hold you and love you and help you change your life, right? As she puts it, we just don't understand pain in this culture. We've developed a bizarre way of talking about pain. It's so bizarre that I did an interview recently on a radio show where I was talking about, we were talking before, in a similar way to the way we were talking before, about loneliness causing depression. And the interviewer said to me, well, this is an extremely controversial theory. And I thought, how did we get to the point where it was regarded as controversial to point out the most banal and obvious thing, which is, if you're lonely, you're going to be much more likely to be acutely unhappy. So I think the grief exception debate reveals something really deep about how we have misunderstood pain. And so Joanne, Dr. Cassiatore, who'd be a great person for you to talk to and give an intro to her, she's an extraordinary woman. Her baby died during birth, her daughter Cheyenne, and she was devastated. And she was horrified to see how many other grieving parents were very rapidly being diagnosed as mentally ill and drugged, right? Because the APA was so uncomfortable with this debate about the grief loophole, they just got rid of it. It doesn't exist anymore, right? So now you can be diagnosed almost immediately after your child dies. In fact, 9% of parents who lose a baby in the United States are diagnosed and drugged in the first 48 hours, right? And as Dr. Cassiatore puts it, we grieve because we've loved, right? Grief is a testament to our love. It's not a glitch, it's not a pathology, it's a profound form of love. If someone you love dies, it is natural and necessary to grieve. If you interrupt that process, if you pathologize the pain, if you say, it's a sign of... So, for example, one of Joanne's clients, she now treats people with who've gone through terrible traumatic grief. One of the parents she worked with mentioned to a psychiatrist that when she would lie there at night, she would sometimes hear her son's voice talking to her. Not in a distressing way, in fact, soothed her. Entirely natural form of grieving. She was diagnosed as psychotic and prescribed loads of antipsychotics. You can see ironically, what a crazy system there is that's telling us we're crazy for having perfectly natural human responses.
We do an activity that we know that it's possibly, like we can die there in the mountain. And it's nothing that we are not doing that because we are close to death, but because we are alive when we're doing. But it's the possibility of an accident, and when you have some close calls, it can be like some friends that they die by your side, or it can be like some accidents. But all the times, I think it's funny that when you start to do mountaineering, like you are afraid about your capacities because you don't know yourself, but you see the mountain as something solid, that it's there, it's like a ball or it's something. And more you go into the mountains, less you are afraid about yourself, like you know better your capacities, your technique, your experience. But you see that the mountain is moving and it's dangers there that you don't see, but they are there. So you are more afraid about the mountain. So it's this thing that it's many things that you cannot control. Like you can think logically, but then avalanches come where it's supposed to not, or like some rock fallings and things, and you need to accept in a way that that's part of it, that it's many things we can control, but it's some of them that is not possible to do.
Yeah, I mean, I look at you as somebody who, despite all of your accomplishments, is very humble. Like you have a very healthy relationship with humility, and not to project, but I would imagine that comes from an appreciation and respect for nature. Like you're never going to beat the mountain, right? And if you don't have a respect and a healthy level of humility when you're attempting these challenges, then you're putting yourself at great peril. So it keeps you like sort of right-sized about everything.
Yeah, I think conquering mountains is a very, very ironic word. I think like we are not conquering mountains, like we can conquer ourselves, and the mountain is is this big mirror where we see ourselves, but we can never pretend to be fighting against the mountain or to be fighting against nature, because first of all, because we are part of it. Like we are part of the nature, so I think it's important to pass there lightly, so we can only see our footsteps. But we like leaving no trace is not only like about leaving rubbish, but it's also about like being accepted by the mountain, or kind of like being there, but trying to don't aggress the mountain. And I think in a way, I don't think that if you don't aggress the mountain, it will respect you more, but at least it keeps you aware of like, okay, you are really, really nothing. You are very, very small, even if you are like, and especially because sports, it's so much about ego and how the sport is organized. Like you win a race and you are in the top of a podium, that it's like, it's something very artificial, like why you are better because you run faster than the guy that is second, and the one is third, or the one is last one. So it's really like building kind of this egocentric mindset, how sport is organized, so you can think, and it's easy to believe that you are someone good or that you are better than others. And especially in mountains, that's very dangerous. And at the end, like it will put in your side, like, you are nothing.
Right, yeah.
We are so much about we want to leave a legacy, or we want to be remembered, or we want to do something important. and then nothing we do is important. Like it's nothing. And I think when you realize that we are not important and what we do is not important, then you realize how wonderful it is.
Yeah.
We get so much with like inertia. It takes a lot of people today, I think. Like we tend to do what it's the simple thing, and to try to do what's easy and what it's supposed to be. And we don't take time to find what we want to do and not what we are supposed to do. But then, like, when you find that that's what you want to do, and to find that the balance on that, it's much, like, it's just the life is much better. Like, everything around is much better. But, I suppose it's just, like, it needs some courage, or it needs some, like, seeing sometime, okay, I don't want to do that, and to be able to say, no, I don't want to do that, and I want to cut on things, and maybe that means less media exposition, or less money, or less things that they are supposed to drive you through success. But then, like, how you count success is very different.
Yeah. So what is living outside the comfort zone taught you? Like this ability to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, how is that a teacher for you, and what can be learned from that?
Well, I think it teaches you. It's mostly decision taking, like how to take decisions, how you take the decisions in the zone, like to be always exposed, like to not be sure about what's going on, and to able to be really rational on seeing very fast what are the different consequences on each decision you are taking at that period. I think that you can apply on life, and you can apply on everything else. And it's I think it's to be really cold-blooded, but to be cold-blooded to follow your emotions, and that's kind of contradictory. But at the end, like, is you need to listen to your emotion, or to listen to yourself, to see where you want to go, what's the lifestyle you want to have, what's the things you want to achieve, and that need to be your emotion that decides this. But then the decision taking through there, it need to be really like rational.
Yeah. What scares you the most?
Many things, I would say, like of course, like when going out, like dying, or like having like a big accident, things like that. But I think what scares me in more general is like where are we going? Like the world, like now we see like all the environmental problems, and especially when you are in these areas, like with a lot of glaciers, like you can see day by day almost how it's changing.
Yeah.
So on this way, like where are we going as the planet? And that's something that it's scaring. And I think that, and where a society, like all the problems between humans that we have, all it's a lot of conflicts, human conflicts too, and I think that's more scary than then like dying.
The future of humanity.
Future of humanity,
Yeah.
But humanity, like we are one species, more of the planet, so also the planet. Yeah.
What's driving all of this? Like, where does the motivation come from? Like, where is the muse? Like, what's behind the curtain here that's propelling you? Is it a sense of wanting to be the best version of who you are? Is it a search for excellence or perfection? Is it just connecting with nature? Like, what is the driving impulse for you?
I think the driving impulse is happiness. Simply, it's like to be happy, and that's that's the easy answer, but it's a deep answer too, because where I find happiness is on knowing myself, challenging myself, and seeing who I am, where I can go, and experiencing different things. I think it's a lot about experience and experiencing places, nature, views. Like I've run in places that they are beautiful, and that's what it motivates me to go to one place or another. Is to why to go there? It's to see the views from that point and see the beauty of the nature. It's one big motivation. And if I can combine that with an inner challenge, that it can be able, like, to put the question, I'm able to progress, and like I think achievement on the sense of like doing things that you think that they are not possible for you before, like all the effort you put to be able to change this status from impossible to possible.
So when someone comes to you and says, oh my God, look what you built, it's so inspiring, but I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what makes me passionate. I'm not sure which direction to take. Like, what is the counsel? I'm sure you field this question all the time. Like, what is your counsel to that individual?
So first and foremost, go play, go discover, like wander around, go to a different country, like encounter enough stuff that you see what actually gives you that spark of interest. Don't expect a spark of passion. It doesn't happen like that. You're going to be interested by something, and that something will be maybe a little more interesting than the next thing. That thing, now go down the process of really engaging with it. Like, go full in. So if you were traveling around India and you went and taught a week-long math class, and you were like, I've never been this fulfilled in my life, move to India and teach in the slums for a year. And if in that
how about just when you go back home, maybe, start tutoring kids. Like, you don't have to revolutionize your life overnight, but if you start bringing greater expression to that impulse, it will lead you in a trajectory that you can't foresee in that moment.
Super powerful answer. So I'm 1,000% with that. Engaging with it, whatever face that takes, but really spending time with it, really doing it. Then if it turns into a full-blown fascination where you're like, I really dig this, then we're going to go down the process of gaining mastery. Only in the process of gaining mastery will you find passion. So to me, passion comes out of, it's kind of like love. I don't believe that love, it needs a different word. Unrequited love is a very different neurological state than reciprocal love. So if you have unrequited love, to me, that's something you really, like, I love singing, but I'm shit at it. So I have unrequited love. I love singing, but singing does not love me back. Now, I could go down the process of gaining mastery, and then I may find that I have a real passion for it, because part of it's going to become, I'm gaining this skill, and this skill of singing allows me to have an emotional impact not only on myself but on other people. I can make them feel good. I can change their mood. I can tell a story, whatever it is that you want to do with the music. But when you're able to do that and you're truly good at it and it has the outcome that you desire, then it can become a passion. But to get a passion, you've got to fight through just ridiculous amounts of boredom, fatigue, everything to truly become good enough at it that it's a skill that has utility. So when it came to, do I buy an island and retire, or do I double down? It came down to, what will make me love my life the most? And the reality is, the thing that would make me love my life the most, because it would still be fun to just go home and be with my wife, but the thing that will make me love my life the most is to do the things that are fulfilling. And I think fulfillment has a very specific, universal formula. And that formula is, work your ass off to get very good at something that you care deeply about, that allows you to serve not only yourself, but other people. That's it. You got to have all of it.
Technique.
Literally.
Yes.
Rich, it is literally technique.
Yeah.
And people, they don't
explain
think
what that is
that
for people that don't know.
So it's this ancient Greek notion of fulfillment, basically. And the fact that it's coming from that word, technique, like to get good at something, and something that's hard. So the way that I explain it to people is, people think of like doing something like going and ladling soup at a soup kitchen, which may be the right place to start. But ultimately, you're going to realize anyone can do this. And so I haven't earned something special that allows me to serve myself and humanity. So it's part of it is working your ass off to get a set of skills that have real value. And my whole thing, this may be the biggest problem we face as a society. People don't remember that skills have utility. They let you do something. You don't learn to build a house to impress your parents. You learn to build a house so people can live in the house you build. And once people understand that, like, holy shit, you're building this house so somebody can live in it, build a home in it, have a family, be sheltered from storms, like, fuck, it's a real thing, man. And so all of that effort and energy you went into, I have the chills right now, is so you can create that moment for yourself, for other people. It is something so much more than going to architecture school, which maybe you went to because your parents wanted that and they were architects. And so you do that thing for that. And you forget that the whole reason you became an architect was to build houses. And so once people realize, oh, I'm putting all of this time and energy to build these things because they let me do something. What do I want to do? What do I want to give? What do I want to create? When you look at skills from that perspective, it is being a superhero. It is being a superhero. You're going to collect these abilities. These abilities actually let you do something. The fact that Superman can fly allows him to save people, allows him to do things other people can't do. We all have this opportunity to become capable of the extraordinary, to be able to do things other people can't do. And that feels so good.
The thing is, though, the thing that's unique about you is that you were able to come to this realization and develop a level of maturity and self-awareness without having to go to play it out at the Lamborghini dealership, right? Because most people who would come into that kind of wealth would go and have that experience for a period of time only to discover what you just expressed, but on the other side of it. So why were you able to do that? Why were you able to avoid that experience and circumvent it?
They say, a fool never learns, a smart man learns from his mistakes, and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. Far too often I've been a fool and have repeated mistakes over and over and over. But I really do try to be smart. I'm not usually as wise as I would like to be, and just find that I learn things the hard way, but I really do learn them. So pain for me is a tremendous instructor, maybe because I hate it so much and just want to move away from it. But thankfully, I don't run from it. I figure out what I did that made me feel that pain, whether it's what I value myself for or whether it's just, hey, bad skill set and you need to address it, and then actually addressing it. I think that everything in life comes down to what your own value system is. So what's your identity? What are your beliefs? What are your values? What are your habits? What are your routines? When you figured those out, that, like, if you just gave me a sheet that told me what those were about somebody, I would tell you what the outcome of their life is going to be. And for me, implementation, being willing to face the fears, the anxieties, the unknown, the need to stare at my inadequacies so I can figure out what skills I actually need in order to go and do something, because implementation is really a question of skill set. So that's why motivation ultimately is going to let you down. It's like, you may be motivated to go do something, but let me walk you through exactly what will happen. You're motivated to try this thing, which you don't know how to do, and you suck at it. And so you go do that thing, you suck. It hurts your ego because your ego is tied up in being right, being good, being talented, worthy, all those like permanent set states that people don't realize are malleable. And so they get stuck in that. It damages their self-esteem, so they want to run in the opposite direction. Psychological immune system kicks in, reminds them that was stupid anyway. Why were they worried about even trying that? And so they back off. And any one time doing that's not a big deal. It's just that people do that over and over and over and over and over. And my thing is, that's such a predictable pattern in humanity. It's like, what do you have to do to counteract that? And the thing you have to do is emotionally reward yourself for being willing to take the steps. So, okay, I know I'm going to do this. I'm going to suck at it. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt my self-esteem. And so what do I need to do to make sure that I don't trip up over that in a way that makes me turn and run in the opposite direction? Number one, stop valuing myself for being good at something and start valuing myself for being willing to learn.
And really the goal of the book is to shake up our intuitions about consciousness as much as possible, because I think if we're able to make progress, if we're able to, and the human brain, I think, is not capable of understanding everything, and so it may just fall into that category. But if we can understand consciousness better, it will require that we really challenge some strong intuitions that we have. And I think we're at that point with regard to consciousness.
I like that you say that the human brain isn't capable of understanding all of these things. I feel like there's a hubristic flair that kind of emanates across the scientific community that we can indeed understand everything. And perhaps that's true at some future point or with the
I think it's
I
think it's an
advent of
aspirational.
robots, but yeah.
It's interesting because most science I know, and typically scientists more than other people I know, are much more willing to say they don't know something, or we may never know, or this is deeply mysterious. Physicists in particular, but scientists in general, I think the messaging that comes out, and I would partly fault the media, but I think it's also just a natural circumstance of the messaging. When we learn something new, it's kind of declared as if we know all these things and everything is knowable.
Right.
But I don't actually think that's the stance of science.
Well, particularly with physicists, I mean, the more you dive deep,
they're
it's
just throwing their
bananas.
hands up all the time.
Yeah, it's like how do you even begin to understand what these things mean?
I've been watching these wonderful videos of this physicist, Nima Arkani Hamed, who's brilliant and hard to understand, but I do my best. But he spends most of his time talking about how space-time is no longer something that we think is fundamental. That there's something that's more fundamental than space-time, that basically there is no, at a fundamental level, there is no space and time. So yeah, I mean, if we're never going to get our minds around that, even if we can believe it.
Well, time is a focus of the book in the later chapters, and I want to get to that. But let's start with let's just define our terms here.
Yeah,
like
that's
when
a
we're
good
talking
idea.
about consciousness, what do we actually mean?
So people do use the word many different ways, and it's confusing. The way I'm using the word in the book, and what I think most people mean when they're talking about the mystery of consciousness, the kind of the consciousness in the most fundamental sense, is the closest word I can get to is experience. And I use Thomas Nagel's description of consciousness from his essay called What It Is Like to Be a Bat, which is a great essay, and I recommend from the 70s. And he says in that essay, an organism is conscious if there is something that it is like to be that organism. And that language, for a lot of people, they kind of get it right away. I actually, for me, that happened. I knew exactly what he meant, but the language really isn't very precise, and it can be confusing. So I usually follow that up with a series of questions, especially for someone who just says, I don't know what that means to say it's like something. And so I'll say, is there something that it's like to be you right now? And I run through this in the book. And of course, whoever I'm asking, we all know we're having an experience, right? We're conscious and we're having an experience. And then is there something that it's like to be this book on the table? And our intuitive answer is no. And despite what's actually true in the world, the fact that we can imagine a collection of matter in the universe that entails no experience at all. The lights are not on from the inside, right? That's non-conscious material. And then a collection of matter in the universe, like your brain, where there's something that it's like to be that matter. That difference is consciousness, and it's how I'm using the word in the book. Although I actually prefer experience. I think it's a slightly less confusing.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that definition over the last week, and I can't escape this sense that it's still reductive in the sense that we're looking at experience through our own experience, right? We're defining what experience means only through the lens of what it means and feels like to be human. And it doesn't leave a lot of space or room for contemplating that experience could take another form that we can't relate to.
Well, yes and no. No, I think, but that's where I'm talking at a more fundamental level. So I think, and that's partly what I try to do in the book, is strip away everything that could be human. Like you could radically change an experience, but the fact of any experience at all. And, I get into these more far out theories, but even if you contemplate that, a single cell or bacteria has some minimal level of experience that you and I could never imagine what it would be like. If there's any experience, the most minimal experience you could imagine, if there's something it's like, then that is consciousness. And that could be completely unlike any human experience.
Right.
It's just whether it's completely dark and dead, whether the stars, there's no experience there at all. It's a collection of atoms that are doing their thing, but there's nothing that it feels like at all. Or there is.
Or there is, right? In a very binary way.
Yeah, well, and yes and no. I mean, it's in a binary way once you go from nothing to something. But then, of course, there's this gradation of what's possible in experience once you have experience. But yeah, I think you can say that it's either there or not.
Right. The fact that it exists begs the question of the evolutionary advantage of having it at all. Like, what is the reason that we developed this?
Yeah.
As opposed to, the sort of zombie example that you use in the book.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very interesting question, and that's kind of where my thinking started. And it's early on in the book that I pose these two questions that I think. So I have two categories of intuitions that I want to challenge. One category are intuitions about consciousness itself, and then intuitions that occur in other areas that are in our lives that strongly influence or inform our intuitions about consciousness. And so I kind of put those into two separate categories, and I start with consciousness. And I just, for myself, in my own notes, I just wanted to get at what are the most basic, strongest intuitions we have about consciousness. And so I asked these two questions in the book. One is there behavior we can point to from outside a system that we can use as conclusive evidence that consciousness is present in that system, right? Is there something we can witness from the outside, some physical behavior that we could say, yes, anytime we see behavior A, B, or C, that's absolute evidence of consciousness. And I think our intuitive answer is yes. And it's a very strong yes. And even after dissecting this for 15 years, my answer is still yes. So an example of that would be... there are so many, but I often use, my daughter. If my daughter's fallen down and she's crying and asking for a Band-Aid, all of that behavior, to me, absolutely signifies that there's consciousness present, right? She's having an experience of pain. And so I wanted to start there because I thought this is an important exercise in all areas of science, and this is where our strongest intuitions are, but could we be wrong? Is it possible that the behavior that we think is evidence of consciousness is not necessarily evidence of consciousness? And so you can kind of go in the direction of AI and imagine we might in the future create something that seems like a child who is crying because she fell down, but the lights are actually not on. There's no consciousness there. But I think the flip side of that is also interesting, which is even if we can come up with behaviors, and I for myself, I can't. And I think it's super interesting that we can't. But on the other side of that, we know that consciousness can be present with no behavior at all.
Right. So you use the diving bell and the butterfly as an example of that.
Have you read that book?
I saw the movie.
So beautifully written. Yeah. So that's based on a writer who had something called locked-in syndrome, where I believe his was due to a stroke, but it can happen a variety of ways that damage the brain, like a stroke. And it left him completely paralyzed, but with a full experience of consciousness, as full as our experience is right now, as full as his experience was before the stroke. He could hear, see, think, write a book, but he had no way. He was completely paralyzed, except for, in his case, his left eyelid. There was some mobility left in his left eyelid, and miraculously, his caretakers noticed this, and they were able to develop a way for him to write through. I don't know the
Linking.
Exact details, but yeah, each blink
language
created a certain letter, and then he would spell out words and wrote this beautiful book. But so that's a case of, even if we can find behavior, there's this other problem in terms of behavior, which is there can be zero behavior and still be a tremendously detailed experience of consciousness.
13-year-olds, right, are in this extremely unique developmental box where their brains are wildly dysregulated, where they're very gawky. They're very easily overtaken by emotion as a function of neurological development, right? They are caught in this moment where their emotion centers have been upgraded, but their perspective maintaining centers have not been upgraded. And so if they become upset, the whole system, crashes. And what my work feels like my main aim is so that parents know the developmental box they're in. So when their 13-year-old walks in the door and they say one word and the kid loses it or, has some sort of meltdown, they can actually have the developmental perspective of, okay, they're having a meltdown because neurologically they can't. It's not that this is about something about me. And then to try to offer some strategies for getting through that moment. So I would say what I aim, hopefully is that, I think the work that psychologists can do is the more we can just give parents a perspective that is neutral, developmental. 12-year-olds are like this, 13-year-olds are like this, 14-year-olds are like that. And it doesn't always map perfectly onto your own kids' ages. Then parents can adjust. But kids are a moving target, right? And unless you have a good memory for your own adolescence or, good access to developmental information, it's very easy to take them at face value, but that's not really appropriate.
But the more you can do that, then you can sort of uncouple from the emotional trigger and depersonalize it, right? We all have our buttons and our kids know where those buttons are and they know how to push them. And, it's taken a lot of work on my part, a lot of meditation and mindfulness work and work that I do in recovery to just be able to have the capacity, the facility to pause when agitated and not just react and get emotional about something, but just, take a beat, take a moment and try to, cogitate the neutral, best next thing to say or do.
I think that's awesome, right? That's one reaction. I want parents to know, it's okay to get mad at your kids, not in a mean, nasty way. But I think, if you don't always have the wherewithal to not react, I think another way to look at those moments is to think, no one's going to ever think our kids are as cute as we think they are, right? And I think there's a lot to be said for learning at home that, if you're a jerk, people aren't going to like it, and they're going to get angry sometimes, or they're not going to want to be with you. And so, in my own parenting, I remember when I had toddlers, I have two daughters, I would get mad. Eventually toddlers make you really mad, right? And I learned to say to my daughters, you know what, I'm actually getting mad, right? I'm asking you repeatedly to do this thing, and I know I'm being patient, but I want you to know I'm getting mad, and I'm going to start to be mad, if this goes on. And then if they continued to be annoying, then when I got mad, I felt like you had fair warning, right? So it wasn't out of the blue. So I think there's a place for anger in family life. If a kid has really been incredibly provocative and the parent is predictable, right? And they know it's coming. I also think there's a lot of value in apologizing to kids when we screw up, right? So say we blow it, right? And they didn't have it coming. To me, there's a lot of power, and there's a lot of beautiful research on this about rupture and repair, right? There's a lot that happens in a relationship when a parent comes back to a teenager and says, you know what, I overreacted and I owe you an apology and I am sorry. There's real growth that happens when parents can do that. What parents can't do is they can't keep doing it repeatedly, right? That's where it can fall apart. But I'm definitely sort of the brand of psychologist who feels like, let me give you 5 options for how to react to a kid because it's going to depend on so many contextual factors. So sometimes you may be able to be reserved. Sometimes you might just get mad and they shouldn't be surprised because they always know that's going to get you going. And sometimes they didn't have it coming and you're going to apologize. But they all are available. And in the course of the millions of interactions we're going to have, we're going to need them all.
Yeah. And those millions of interactions, there's a scientific way of kind of approaching that. And then there's a very kind of intuition-based, artistic way of approaching it. It's like this dance, right? And you have this beautiful analogy of the swimming pool that I think kind of encapsulates that. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Sure. So this is an Untangled, and it grew out of my observation that, teenagers work to become independent. That's their job. The piece that seems to really get parents is that they don't become just slightly more independent each day. They don't just become a little bit further and more autonomous each day. That a typical pattern is that you haven't heard from your teenager for 3 days, right? Or she's barely acknowledged your existence. And then something goes wrong, right? And she's very, very upset. And so then she comes seeking the parent, right? And it may be that she's needing physical comfort or just wants to talk and wants to share things. It is not unusual in these moments where there is actually a physical, like they're draping themselves on you or like cuddling near. Okay, so the girl may be upset. I know, the parent's thrilled, right? The parent's like, and like loving it, absolutely loving it. And then she's gone again, right? And so in observing this happening in families, the metaphor I came up with, and it's slightly belabored, but it does work really well, is that the girl is like a swimmer, and the water is the world, and the parents are the wall that hold the whole thing together. They're the pool. And swimmers want to be out in the water, right? I mean, they want to be out in the pool and they want to be with other swimmers. They want to be gaining strength. And I keep thinking about this metaphor. You know, when you're in the middle of the pool, you're not thinking about the edge of the pool. Like that's the furthest from your mind, right? But then they get dunked or they get exhausted or something, and they have that feeling, you know, I think all of us maybe can remember this from swimming lessons where they're like, I'm drowning, right? So they come scrambling for the wall, which is the parent. And they cling to the parent to get their breath back. Okay, so the parent's loving it. I think that usually what happens for teenagers is they do have that swimming pool lesson experience where they're like, oh, wait, never mind, I'm fine. And so then... Goodbye. But I think actually it becomes a pretty abrupt goodbye because they're like, I'm fine. And oh my God, I'm in my mother's bed, right? Like this is so awkward. So they shove off, right? They push off in a pretty abrupt way. So they may say, and I love this about teenage girls, even my own, like that margin of like mean but not punishable commentary, that they make. So they may say like, wait, did you wear that today?
Right.
Like out, or something like that. Like it's very
just with like a razor blade precision.
Yes. And so the parents' repeated experience is, I have no idea where you are. Oh my God, you're letting me cuddle you. You just kicked me in the stomach, right? And it's sort of on repeat. And so what I wrote that up for is not because I'm like, and so here's the magic solution to prevent this, because you actually cannot prevent this. And I actually don't want you to prevent this. Though I don't think your kids should be rude. If they say something really rude, you can say like, that's rude. We don't talk like that. What I wanted was for parents, and this is exactly what we were talking about, to know this core. Like this is what's happening. This is not meant as a personal rejection. Your daughter can breathe again. Now she's on, to her next thing. And so what my aim in offering parents this metaphor was so that they would savor when they did get to have those moments.
And it was this beautiful sunny day, actually, this kind of calm day where I, had these tears of joy rolling down my face. It was actually one of my best moments. It was kind of like, oh, like I made it. Only 23 people, I think, have ever done solo, unsupported, and unassisted from the coast to the South Pole, 23, 24 in history. And so just doing that was like an amazing accomplishment. It's a big moment for me. And I'm like, oh, I've kind of, I'm feeling good about this. And then the next day, I just get lit up in this storm. And the next 7 or 8 days, like the storms had lasted previous to this about 1 or 2 days. And then all of a sudden, this storm got 6 days, 7 days, 8 days. I find myself, kind of picking through this Sastrugi, day 48, 8 days in this battle with this storm. The wind hasn't been anything lower than 40, 50 mile per hour. It's just brutal conditions. And I find myself falling like really bad. So I actually fall on the ground, hit the ground super hard. And I remember this one moment I fall into this big hole and my rope on my harness pulls tight and then my sled starts sliding towards me. And I'm in this kind of 4-foot hole and I see this sled like gonna like maybe kind of fall down on top of me. It's like I'm looking where my leg is, but like I can't move it because the skis are on the ground. I'm like, wow, like, and it's like teetering. It's like this sled falls on me. It's like broken leg, broken ski in a Sastrugi storm. And then I look down and my skins have ripped off the bottom of one of my skis, which is impossibly hard to get back on in this storm. And I've only gone for 1 hour. And so I'm like, okay, the only way to get my skins back on is to set up my tent. So I think to myself, okay, like I should set up my tent right now and then like maybe regroup, but I like can't just waste the day because I am starting to run or lower on food and certainly, you know, trying to stay in the front of this race. And so I set up my tent, and there's this video clip of me where I filmed a lot of this stuff. Obviously, I filmed it all myself, but I filmed a lot through the time, and I'm looking in the camera, and I'm just going like, I'm sobbing, and I'm like, I'm not doing good. Like, I just want to give up. Like, I'm like so beat down in this. And it was just kind of in this moment, you know, two things for me happened in that moment to get out of that headspace, which is another one of my favorite mantras. It's the simple one that a lot of us have, which is this too shall pass, you know, remembering sort of the impermanence of this moment. But also, I had this satellite device that I was pinging to the satellites every 10 minutes that people could track me in real time. That's how the New York Times and family and friends and all these school kids through a nonprofit were following along. And, you know, they see that I've stopped. And a friend of mine, Blake Brinker, he saw that I stopped and was like, wow, something must not be going like well for you. Like, and was checking in. And you could set these like rudimentary text messages to the satellite device. And he sent a text message, and it's a passage from one of my favorite books, which is The Alchemist. And he says, remember the allegory from The Alchemist, that you're being tested by all the lessons you have to go through before finally achieving the ultimate success. And he goes, don't forget when passing, you know, The Alchemist, of course, is about the desert, but Antarctica is its own kind of desert. And he says, more often than not, people die of thirst when crossing the desert a few minutes before seeing the palm trees on the horizon. And so it was just this reminder of like, yo, like you're in it, like you are getting tested right now. But if you can manage to get back out of this tent, remember that this too shall pass, then you will hopefully get to the other side of this. And sure enough, on that day, it was tough. But, you know, just taking my tent up and down in the storm takes an hour and a half. And so I do that. But instead of getting my sleeping bag out, I take my tent down again, fix my skins, and get back out and battle through this storm and manage 20 miles that day, which was a pretty solid mileage for me on any given day. And I think to me that was both the lowest moment, but also a crux moment where I'm being tested by all of these things. And it would have been, there was a million reasons to quit in that moment. At least maybe not quit the whole project, but quit in that moment. Be like, I'm falling. I'm going to get hurt. My sled's going to fall on me. My skins are falling off. This storm's lasted a week. Like, I'm starting to get frostbite on my nose and my cheeks. Like, I'm beat up. And I still managed to, you know, with the strength of sort of others and that vibration from family and friends and supporters, is able to kind of draw some strength and inspiration to keep going. And really kind of the essence of all of this was how much as humans, of course, I'm all alone, and this is what I'm, you know, pontificating about, but I'm thinking about the importance of community, the importance that we all have to lean in, to love one another, to really be compassionate, to help, to uplift and support one another, and how much stronger we can be when there's that, you know, not this finite level of love, but this infinite love that we can share with one another, and what that can really create in this universe was absolutely spectacular to feel that and be so viscerally connected to that at the end of this journey.
And what has it taught you about not only your own capabilities, but about human capabilities in general and potential?
You know, I feel like I scratched the surface of this, you know, 11 years ago. And we've talked about this before, but when I was severely burned in this fire in Thailand, I was told I would never walk normally. And then I recovered from that through the guidance of my mother's love and positivity, ultimately.
Yeah. And I'm going to interrupt you really quickly here just to share one reflection on that. We have talked about that, and I'm well aware of that story from your life, but this is how weird memory works.
Yeah.
In my mind, I had this sense that had happened way earlier in your life than it actually had. And when I sort of realized, like, oh, wait, that was 2008. Like, that wasn't that long ago, dude. That was only 10 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So, I had been a collegiate swimmer before that. I mean, kind of gone through a big chapter of my life. And, I was, took a surfboard and a backpack and scraped together some pennies after college to go travel the world. And I met Jenna at the very beginning of that trip. So that was a net positive for that, who ultimately became, of course, this most important person in my life. But not long after that, I found myself in rural Thailand with a kerosene flaming rope wrapped around my legs, my body lit on fire, and having to dive into the ocean to extinguish the flames to save my life, but not before my legs were severely burnt, and spent several months in the Thai hospital being told I would never walk again normally. And in that moment, my mother came, she arrived about the 4th or 5th day and kind of comes to my bedside, and she says, like, Colin, like, visualize your future, like, visualize yourself, being whatever you want to be, your life's not over. And I was just in this deep, tragic, place in my mind and my body and my spirit. And I closed my eyes, kind of trying to, placate my mother in some regard. And I pictured myself crossing the line of a triathlon, which is not something I'd ever done. And so I won't get into the whole story, but the next 18 months were kind of learning from that lesson and keeping this sort of fixed goal in my mind of racing this triathlon, and ultimately, competing in the Chicago Triathlon as an amateur and winning my first, ever triathlon and my first go at it, which was
crazy.
A crazy moment. But the reason I bring that story up, I mean, it's an important inflection point in my life, which is, in that moment, I started to feel, I wasn't like, wow, like I'm so amazing. Like I'm so blessed and so good at this. I was like, wow, like as humans, I believe we all have these reservoirs of untapped potential inside of us and can achieve these extraordinary things when we shift our mindset for the positive, when we're supported by this loving community of infinite love and compassion and positivity. Like, wow, like how extraordinary is that? And so that was my first kind of lesson towards that. But I was, 22, 23 years old, and on kind of the beginning of this journey, which has been the last, decade of my life in this chapter in Antarctica. Certainly not the last chapter of my life, but the most recent chapter of my life is Antarctica. And to connect to that on such an even 10x or 100x deeper level, which is like, wow, like look at what we are capable of. Myself, I mean, people keep coming back. I do these interviews and things, and people want to say like, Colin, like, are you superhuman? And I'm like, yeah, I'm superhuman, and so are you. Like, so are all of us. But I think it just happens how we flex this muscle between our ears, the 6 inches between our ears. Like what we can do with our minds is extraordinary, and how we can all be connected and uplifting of each other in that sense. And so for me in Antarctica, the lessons learned were, yes, about my own potential, but really were resonant, across humanity of what we are all capable when we set our minds to things. And I don't think that necessarily anyone wants to walk across Antarctica solo and unsupported and unaided. I don't blame you for not wanting to do that. But like, we have dreams, we have goals, and it's so easy to get in our own ways of stopping the progress towards that. And like when I started this whole thing, like I said, Jen and I had like no money. We had like a whiteboard on our wall, every reason not to do this. And like, it should be like, yeah, like go get a real job, like grow up, like do something. We're like, no, like what can we do to have positive impact? Let's start a nonprofit. Like, let's dare to dream greatly. And like, we started out by like taking out our Mac laptops and being like, well, if we want people on social media to do this, we better know about marketing. I had like 200 Instagram followers, like my parents and my close friends, and we're Googling like, Google, what's the difference between marketing and PR? Like we're basic of all basic questions, but I just got the metrics back on this last project, and we did, as of now, it's 1.8 billion media impressions and counting. And I don't say that because like I care about having like my name in like the press, but because of that, we've created this platform, this ability to share these stories about inspiration, positivity, love, nutrition, health, all the things that I'm passionate about. And I know from you, from having this podcast, it's also a blessing for you to be able to, have this voice, not because like you want to be Rich Roll, this like famous guy, but because you have this opportunity to share with the world, and the resonant positivity that you can put in the world from that is incredibly humbling and meaningful. And I applaud you for it.
I mean, lasting impact, that's the juice, right? So what is the lasting impact that what is the impact that you want this adventure and everything that you're doing going forward to have? Like, what is the change that you want to see in the world?
Yeah, I think that when I've really tried to drill down to this, I mentioned this before, like sort of this athlete in arena, and by the way, I'm a massive sports fan. Like I like watching sports throughout my life. But I think that our sort of knowledge or interest in sports in general, not always the case. I think like the NBC Olympic coverage is a great example of not doing this, but oftentimes the sports are like winning, losing, like this sort of like this zero-sum game of like cheering for your team or rooting against the enemy or something like that. But, for me in doing this, it's not so much about that at all. It's about tapping into these sort of universal truths that we all face and encounter, which is like facing obstacles, stepping outside of our comfort zone to grow, and being an example of those lessons and showing all the flaws. Like I'm not sitting here going like, yep, I stepped off the plane, I knew I could beat Lou, he was not, it's like, no, like I like had this huge daunting task of crossing Antarctica. Oh, and by the way, like the most experienced polar explorer in the world, it's also out there beside me, but I was willing to like give it a shot, which is I think emblematic of someone starting a small business, everyone going like, oh, but like why wouldn't Google or Facebook just like do the same thing? Why would you start with that tech idea? Like that's never going to work. Or, the person that's like starting a family or has lost a loved one and like just figuring out how to get on through life. And so hopefully like by sharing my story as authentically and really as I can with all the ups and downs and the struggles and the warts and the successes, that people can take from that in their own lives what they will and really paint their own masterpieces.
So what is the protocol now? Like, how do you make sure, because you've been in, treatment centers before and have seen what has happened when you haven't had like active, aftercare and, really made your recovery a life priority.
Yeah. I think that's the greatest unknown. And that's, so I set up as much guardrails and support as I could coming back here. I started work initially part-time, and then I was still doing more like an intensive outpatient. So I was kind of doing the two, and then you slowly step down. And then right now I have kind of an outpatient team, and then really just setting up a support network. And for me, I have a great support network, but it's making sure that I actually use it, and actually reaching out and saying like, hey, I need help. And this thing that we talked a lot about at treatment is outing yourself, and just saying like, hey guys, I have to out myself right now. I'm having really bad disordered thoughts, and I just need to tell somebody and put it out there, because when I put it out there, then it doesn't hold as much power over me.
Yeah, and you have to do that in real time when it's occurring, because the tricky thing is when that moment arises, when you're, staring at a plate of food and you're thinking about like not eating it, or it's too late. Like then they're like, call somebody, but that train left the station a long time ago, maybe months ago. Like it's about the daily habit of checking in with people, and people who know you and can monitor like, hey, you're a little off today. What's going on? And kind of compelling you to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. It's having that support system and network, and really for me, fully owning that there are some things that I can't be completely self-reliant on right now, and that's a bitter pill to swallow for somebody who likes to be fully self-reliant. But there have been times in coming back to the Bay Area and coming back to work where I realized like I need to set up dinners with folks right now to like go out and eat with them, because it's better. I do much better in like a social scenario than when I'm by myself,
Right. Well, now you're publicly on the hook.
I know. Well, and so now I have the entire world as accountability.
I know, right?
So it's a double-edged sword, because I did have some people reach out to me and say, oh, well, now everybody's watching you can't screw up. And all of a sudden my heart was like, oh my God. I'm like, I'm human. I'm going to screw up.
Yeah.
I've screwed up. Like we're all going to have screw ups. And I think it's, with alcohol or drugs, it's very easy to name your screw ups, because it's like, I did the substance or I didn't do the substance. Food, it's very, very slippery.
Yeah, it's not binary.
No, it's like, did I restrict that meal a little, or am I really eating to hunger? So
you got to really be in touch with yourself, and be willing to have that kind of honest dialogue going on all the time. Like it's about your intentions as much as anything else, right?
Right.
But the authenticity and the vulnerability with which you kind of have offered this up to the world, I think is honorable and super courageous. And I don't say that in a perfunctory or light way. Like it was, I know it was a move that like you had a lot of consternation about. Like should I talk publicly about this? You don't have to. You have no obligation to. You made that decision. I was on the I went to the website for Opal because I wanted to see what this organization is about. And they had there's a slogan on the homepage that is beauty in imperfection and authenticity. Yeah. And that's lovely, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're all imperfect. And I think the path towards being that fully integrated person who's not living with that kind of dissonance requires, the courage to be authentic in real time, and to be human and to be, exposed on some level. And, I can't imagine what it felt like after you wrote that blog post and you hit, publish on it. Like, walk me through that.
It was actually the most freeing experience that I've ever had. I sat down and I bawled my eyes out for the next half an hour or so. As you
were writing it, or after you published it?
After I published it.
Yeah,
I mean,
just the catharsis.
The catharsis. Because I had been writing it, over like a span of since, I left treatment at the end of June. And then so it took me like a few weeks to kind of wrap my brain around it. I was so anxious. I remember that day before I was going to publish it. It was all done. It was sitting. It was ready to go. And I remember actually going to the pool to swim that morning, and then just it was the best swim of my life, because it was just anxiety or something like that. I don't know, fueled. But in putting it out there, it finally, I cried, because it was just, I finally felt true to myself.
And what was the motivation behind doing that?
honestly, a lot of it, I hate to say that there was a selfish motivation, because it was almost an alignment for myself.
Yeah.
You know, people were like, "Oh, you're so great. You're inspiring other people." And I'm like, that's
no,
great.
The discomfort of living in that kind of dissonance becomes intolerable.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can't say why exactly I felt the need to out it to the entire world, as opposed to just, because I understand there are portions of yourself that you can keep close, in hand. You don't have to let everybody know your dirty laundry. But for me, it was very important to have that be a part of my story, considering I've been so open and vulnerable about many other things, but not this. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of selectiveness didn't sit well with me.
Right.
And just to be able to feel free. I felt very, very free after I published it. Uh-huh. And I went for a run the next day, and I was like, I was the most just free feeling. And then people started giving me negative feedback, and then that went away. But I'm joking.
Well, I mean,
the
first
initial
of all,
24 hours was great.
I don't know. I'm sure, well, look, first of all, shame can't survive the light. Right. So whatever shame you were harboring, the only way out of that is to do exactly what you did. And I'm sure there's trolls out there or whatever, but like all I saw was this overwhelming like outpouring of like love and support. Like Absolutely. It was like huge. It was like a viral moment in the endurance sports world. I honestly will say I expected a reaction. I did not expect that type of attention to it, and I'm blown away in the best way possible. I mean, it was amazing. Like, I mean, I get kind of like choked up thinking about it, because people were so supportive and so great. I'm still like sorting through emails to respond to people. And I think for me, it was very important to talk about it too at a time where I am not recovered. And that's a bit tough, because I think that you see so many people talk about their disorders in the past or their addictions in the past, but it comes from a recovered perspective. I got a lot of feedback saying like, thank you for being open before you're there, because it's not as simple as that. And I go back and forth on whether like total freedom is possible. I feel like the voices get quieter, like things like they get easier the further and further like you get into recovery. But I think that you always kind of have to be vigilant, and maybe you can speak to that too. I mean, I'm of the mind that there is no recovered. There's recovery. There's being active in your recovery. I would never consider myself recovered. Yeah. And I had a relapse 8 years ago after I'd been sober for 13 years. Like I'm very aware of how fragile it is and how it requires, constant attention and focus. And that's not to say that, your situation is the same. It's different. But I would be curious about, like, is there a sense like that there is a recovered when it comes to relationship with food? I just feel like that impulse is always there, and keeping it at bay, is important. And there's tools for doing that. But to fall under the belief that it could disappear altogether and never reappear, I think is dangerous. Yeah,
I think there's different mindsets. I think some people think that if you don't believe in that fully recovered is possible, then you're never going to get there. But maybe this might be more of the unpopular opinion, but I do kind of similarly believe to what you do, is that, like you can be in a very, very good place of recovery, but you still need to be mindful of things. And especially the longer, like this has been 20 years of my life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this stuff has become so ingrained and automatic in me. And so it's almost in some ways like exposure therapy and unlearning habits and things like that didn't happen overnight,
mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's all about where you are in the moment. Like my relationship with this is like, what am I doing today? Like where is my recovery like in the middle of this experience that we're having right now? Because I know people with 30 days of sobriety who like are super sober, and I know people who've been sober for 35 years who are out of their minds.
Right.
They may not drink, but they don't have like emotional sobriety, which is really kind of like where there's no destination for that, because you can always iterate and improve on, who you are as a human being. So it's less about where are my cravings for alcohol right now than it is about like, what's up with my character defects? You know what I mean?
It was finally
like, I like being married to my wife. Like I don't want her to leave. Like, so I have to like be on top of this shit.
It's funny when as soon as I started to realize that like the food was no longer like the scary issue, and I was like, God, now I have to work on myself.
Right.
I was like, now I have to like kind of like underpin.
But that's
like
the whole thing.
That is the point.
The universe is driving you. Like this is all about that.
Right. And I think my big thing is that I'm a thinker, and I've always like no, I know my feelings. For so many years, I was really good at thinking about my feelings, like really, really good at like thinking about my feelings, but not actually like feeling anything. And I think that actually in our society, we prize a lot of thinking over feeling. A lot of people follow like the Stoic like philosophies and things like that, and once I finally start to like tap into what am I feeling right now, and like then just like not even assigning judgments to that, but and then just actually like being like feelings are valid too. It doesn't all have to come from the mind.
Our culture has shifted and changed. The gatekeepers are gone. The tools of creativity are more accessible than ever. There's a democratization of this universe that didn't exist back then. That I think has stimulated and motivated and inspired a lot of people to think about creativity more broadly.
You nailed it.
And whether that means quitting your job to be an artist, or just finding a hobby, or like being intentional about the images you put on Instagram.
Sure.
These are all aspects of creativity, and really what you've done is broaden the aperture on what creativity means, while also underscoring the importance of it in everyday life for everybody, no matter who you are.
If you took that away, I am done. I am out.
Done. Because this podcast is over.
No, that's literally you just sort of, I don't even need to introduce the book, because that is the ethos behind the book. That was, specifically broadening the aperture on creativity. Because right now there's people going, hey, I don't know if I'm not really identify as a creator. I'm an attorney, or I'm an accountant, or I'm whoever's listening. And it's like, no. This is exactly why you. Yeah. And if you're a creator, you identify as that. Great. This is like right in your sweet spot. But there's a whole universe of people who are what I call creative curious, that understand that there's some power there that I can't like the je ne sais quoi. I don't know how to grab onto it, and I want to understand that a little bit more. And when you broaden that definition of what creativity is, which to me is part of the challenge that we've had historically with how art and creativity have been viewed in our culture. When you broaden the aperture a little bit, you can all of a sudden sink your teeth into it and find immense and powerful meaning.
Yeah, I think historically the word creative or creativity isn't necessarily pejorative, but it's exclusionary. People either identify with that or they don't, or they're scared of it.
Yeah.
And in truth, it is part and parcel of what makes us human. It is a universal aspect of the condition of being in one of these bodies.
Yeah, literally, we are creating machines. And that's part of like expanding the definition to understand that, wait a minute, my decisions on how to get to your house today, do I go this way or that way? What I decide to do with my day and my time on a minute by minute basis, but also on a life scale basis. Like those are all wickedly, wildly creative acts that have been discarded into like, if you were thinking of them in neural pathways, just like the base neural pathway that you always go. But there's an opportunity in all of those places to do something different. And when you start to realize that this creativity in small daily doses is the same exact muscle that we use to create our life. It's just creativity at a different scale. Your head starts to go like, okay, I
Right.
need to pay attention here.
Right. Well, so then if I was to ask you, how do you define creativity? What is the response to that?
The way that I approach it is so simple. It might be painful for some people, but it's the act of putting two things that might not have gone together just a moment ago, of putting those two things together to create something new and useful. Mm-hmm. So it is a very broad definition, but that's to me what actually makes the book really relevant, because there are people like, this is not about changing your lifestyle. This is not about moving to Paris and wearing a beret and smoking a cigarette.
It can be about that if that's your deal.
Totally. It can be, but it doesn't have to be about a new set of friends. Instead, it's a new way of operating. It's a new way of seeing what's in front of you. And, just at a super top level, it's like I operate from the principle that every person is creative, that it's the thing that separates us from every other species on the planet. Mm-hmm. And it is, it's fun. I'll just walk into any first grade classroom, right? Who wants to come up to the front of the room and draw me a picture? Every hand goes up. And then do the same thing with the 6th grade class and then a 9th grade class. And you see that this is a thing that is innate and we're training it out of us. So if that's principle 1, principle 2, 1 is that there's creativity in every person. 2 is that creativity is a muscle. It's a habit, not a skill. It's a process, not a product. It's a muscle. Mm-hmm. And I guess Maya Angelou said it well, like the more you use, the more you have.
Right.
Just think about training or anything else, right? So it becomes more available to us. And then if you follow 1 and 2, the simple argument number 3 is, so then all these small creative acts that we do every day, yes, playing the guitar, making a meal, building a family, writing code, yes, those things are literally the things that are going to give you the insight that you have agency over creativity with a capital C, like creating the arc of your life. Mm-hmm. So to me, though, like from a very simple definition, you just have to make a simple 3-step argument, and all of a sudden you're at this, like, I need to pay attention.
Yeah. That creativity is a non-depleting, renewable resource, that it's not something that certain people are struck with, but that they cultivate through a deliberate and intentional practice over time.
Yeah.
That is divorced from the results of it and all about the process of doing.
You've got it.
Like, I think you say
again, I'm out of here. This is
I think you
amazing.
I think you say in the book, like, it's not fake it till you make it; it's make it till you make it. So the process of being a maker in whatever form that is for you.
Yeah,
yeah.
And when you think about it, like, let's talk about it away from the sort of small C creativity of making a meal or building a business or whatever, and talk about it on the life scale. The people that you are inspired by, that you moved by, that you're connected to, that you admire, their lives were created intentionally. There's all kinds of circumstances, but they created the puzzle that is their life, and they're expressing themselves in a particular way, and it's intentional, it's designed, and it's created. It's not just you just fell into this thing one day. And,
right.
And so when you start to look at creativity with that sort of capital C on the life arc, you're like, who do I am? And it doesn't need to be someone famous or fancy on the internet or some, well-known entrepreneur or artist. It can be your next door neighbor that lives in amazing integrity and they have a mindfulness about them that you really like. That's not on accident. That was created. That person set out with a vision for themselves and slowly but surely got there. There was no overnight. It was a creative process, and that's available to you.
Yeah.
This is why I advocate action over intellect. Like if you're sitting around trying to figure this out and make the perfect chess move, like that's not how it happens. You make a lot of little imperfect moves. You learn a little bit of a lesson, and then you move on. Just try not to make the same mistake more than 1 or 2 times, ideally 1. But it's the action, it's the doing that actually creates the learning. It's very hard to, and it's great to get information from the internet or your mentor or whomever, but learning, like actually doing that part, is incredibly valuable. What needs to be the takeaway from this talk is whether you are all in on this or you're just deciding if you're going to put your toe in the water, amazing time. And it just so happens that this corresponds with it is the riskiest time in the world to play it safe. Because whatever you were sold as safe, now that's beige. It's vanilla. It is it's not like you'll blend in a good way. It's you're leaving so much on the table in terms of identity, earning power, connection with other people, vulnerability, authenticity. Like if you're not sort of it's the equivalent of not participating.
Yeah, especially as we progress towards this AI, society that's going to commandeer a lot of those jobs.